Good morning, everyone. My name is Mariana. In today's presentation, Danilo and I are going to explain our short story to all of you. We decided to create a continuation for the short story The Monkey's Paw by William Weimar Jacobs. But before we refer to our story, we would like to highlight a couple of relevant details that happened in the original version. So, in that way, it will be easier for all of you to understand what happens in our story. To begin with, in the original story, we have some information about the origin of the monkey's paw and its owners. We're going to make a brief explanation of the owners of the paw and what happened with them. According to the Sergeant Major Morris, this paw had a spell put in it by an old fakir, who is considered a very holy and wise man. He wanted to show that fate rules people's lives and that those who interfered with it so did to their sorrow. This fakir put a spell on it so that three separate men could each have three wishes from it. The story indicates the three owners of the paw. The first man is unknown. The story doesn't reveal his identity, but it mentions that his last wish was death, probably because of the consequences of his two other wishes. After his death, the Sergeant Major Morris became the second owner of the paw. He went to India and in one of his adventures he got it. This character also had a terrible experience with it. We don't know his wishes, but he clearly doesn't want to have the paw anymore. He tried to burn it, but he was stopped by Mr. White. And this character is the third owner of the paw. He wanted to keep it even when Mr. Morris warned him about the consequences of the wishes. However, Mr. White ignored those warnings and he used the monkey's paw. As a result, his son Gerber died in a terrible accident. The story doesn't mention the last wish of Mr. White. We also don't know what happened with his family and the paw, so we thought that it would be interesting to create a continuation for this story. In the case of our story, we're going to assume that Mr. Morris was mistaken and that the power of the paw was not limited just to three owners. We're going to add one more owner. Having said this, I will read the story. After his tragic loss, Mr. White hid the monkey's paw in a cardboard box in the attic. He was the third owner who had his wishes granted. He thought that the spell expired after his last wish, or at least that is what the story of Sergeant Major Maury suggested. For a long time the monkey's paw remained hidden in a dark place. Many years after Mr. White and his wife's death, none of the subsequent owners of the house had felt the necessity of cleaning the attic. In 2006, the house was bought by a young woman named Amber Thompson. She decided to remodel the place, and she also got rid of some boxes that were stored in the attic. One day she was going to place one of these cardboard boxes in a garbage container, but suddenly the box tore up and all of its contents spilled all over the sidewalk. Desperately, she began to pick up all the objects as fast as she could. Freddie Anderson, a lonely middle-aged man who was getting home after work, noticed the incident. Mr. Anderson stood up and went to help her. "Hey, do you need a hand over there?" said Freddie with a friendly tone of voice, and Miss Thompson, with a smile on her face, nodded. They were about to finish gathering everything when a strange object caught Mr. Anderson's attention. "Look, I have never seen an object like this one before," said Mr. Anderson with great amazement. "What is it?" said Miss Thompson, frowning with disgust. "It looks like a monkey's paw," answered Mr. Anderson as he examined the paw carefully. "Interesting. This paw reminds me of that tale about the rabbit's foot. Some people say that it has the power to grant wishes. Of course, that is only a myth," said Miss Thompson, laughing. I don't believe such stories either, but it looks fantastic, exclaimed Mr. Anderson. If you want, you can keep it. Thanks for helping me. I have seen you before. You must be the next door neighbor. It's a pleasure. My name is Lambert, said Miss Thompson. It's a pleasure. My name is Freddie, said Mr. Anderson. They both talked for a while and then Mr. Anderson said goodbye to her. While he walked to his house, he couldn't stop looking at the monkey's paw. It would be funny if this paw could grant wishes, but that is too good to be true. Anyway, it is just an old story, he thought. He placed the monkey's paw over the table and he lay down on the couch in the living room. Mr. Anderson started thinking about his job as a waiter. He had a terrible day because his boss, Mr. Williams, kept yelling at him. Today he threatened to cut his pay because he broke a plate by accident. He saw the monkey's paw one more time and the craziest idea came to his mind. I have nothing to lose. I wish my boss, Mr. Williams, dies, so I will never have to see him again, he said aloud while holding the monkey's paw. I guess I have lost my mind. Now I'm talking to a paw, he said with irony. He placed the paw on the table and went to sleep. The next day, the ringing of the phone woke him up early in the morning. One of his co-workers called him to tell him the news.
It must be a coincidence. Millions of people die while sleeping. There is nothing supernatural or magical about it, he thought while listening to his co-worker Andy Jones. I don't know how to tell you this, but Mr. Williams' wife said that now that his husband is dead, she will close the restaurant. We are going to lose our jobs, Andy said. Without saying a word, Mr. Anderson hung up his cell phone and examined the monkey's paw. He certainly will never see his boss's face again, because now he is unemployed and broken. A coincidence. It is only a coincidence, he said calmly. But at the same time, deep inside, he could feel a rush of excitement that went all over his body. He took the monkey's paw and placed it in his backpack. Then, he took his car keys and went to the restaurant to find out exactly what happened. While he was stuck in a traffic jam, he couldn't help but think about this strange coincidence. He took out the paw and looked at it hesitantly. It is impossible that a monkey's paw can really grant you a wish, he thought. But the thoughts about Mr. Williams' death kept coming to his mind, and the doubt and uncertainty made him yearn for wishing one more time. He looked outside and noticed how the motorcyclist passed by his car, and immediately an evil thought came to his mind. I wish that motorcyclist has an accident right now, he said aloud, holding the monkey's paw with both hands. Mr. Anderson, without any hope, looked at how the man kept moving, but suddenly he lost control of his motorcycle and ended up colliding with a car. Impossible, he said astoundedly while his hands were shaking. In a matter of seconds, a speeding truck crashed into Mr. Anderson's most valuable belonging, his car. With some difficulty, he opened the door and got out of the vehicle. He was still in shock and now with pain in his back, but it took him a couple of seconds to understand everything. The stories are real. What some people say about a talisman that grants your wishes, but in exchange, you have a consequence, he thought while laughing. That changes your life. A curse for changing your fate, he thought. Just imagine what someone can do with this monkey's paw. Power, wealth, chaos, and the list continues. Why not all? It was clear. He knew what he wanted, but the stories indicate that there are only 3 wishes. Mr. Anderson had only one chance. He took his backpack and walked to a nearby forest to wish again. This better works, he said with a nervous smile. He took the monkey's paw out of his backpack and said aloud his last wish, and then he looked at the sky.
To continue, we're going to refer to the characters that are mentioned or appeared during our story. First, we have Mr. White. He doesn't have an active role in our story, but he was the previous owner of the monkey spa and he's considered a dynamic and around character. The same happens with Miss White. She's a dynamic and around character. She doesn't appear in the story, but she's also important in the other one. And we mention her within the first paragraph or our story. Then we have Sergeant Major Morris. He is the second owner of the monkey's paw. He is a static and around character. He warned Mr. White about the paw, and well, he's the one that tells the story about the three wishes that are going to be granted to three different owners. Then we have Amber Thompson. She could be considered as one of the most important characters in our story. She is the owner of the house, in this case, Mr. White's house. She's a static and around character. She gave the pod to Freddie Anderson, so her role was important in that sense. Then we have the protagonist, Freddie Anderson. He's a dynamic and around character. We're going to explain more a little bit about him in a couple of seconds. But in this case, this character is the one that shows more changes in his attitude. Then we have Mr. Williams. He's Mr. Anderson's boss. He's a minor character. He's one of the victims of the wishes, and he is considered a static and a flat character. We don't know a lot about him. We just know that he is really rude with Mr. Anderson. And finally, we have Andy Jones. He is Mr. Anderson's co-worker. In the same way, he's a minor character and he's a static and flat character. As I said before, we want to analyze the protagonist, Freddie Anderson. Mr. Anderson shows many changes through the narration. First, he seemed to be a friendly neighbor because he went to help Amber when she needed. But then this character shows another layer. It is not possible to know if he was always like that or if he started acting this way after he got the monkey's paw. But what the narration tells is that this character lost control. He started acting different, and it seems that this character enjoyed all of the tragedies that his wishes produced, even if that generated other consequences for himself. For example, he lost his job and his most valuable belonging, in this case his car, was damaged as well. But he really didn't care about all of those things. He still wanted more. He basically never learned the lesson, and it is possible to notice that this character wants more when he says, "Just imagine what someone can do with this monkey's paw." So this shows that this character is out of control. He's not stable.
The other literary element that we are going to analyze is the plot. First of all, at the beginning of the story we have the exposition. In this section there are some references to the monkey's paw story. For example, the narrator lets the reader know that it's been a long time since Mr. and Mrs. White passed away, but that the monkey's paw is still hidden in the attic of their house. After that, the narrator tells us some important information about the setting. For instance, that time has changed and now the events are taking place in 2006. Also, we are introduced to a couple of characters. First, we have Amber Thompson, who is the new owner of Mr. White's house, and then we are introduced to Freddie Anderson, which is the main character of the story. Secondly, we have the rise in action. This part of the story starts developing just before the inciting event takes place, which is when Freddy is helping Amber and he finds the monkey's bone. In this section, there are some peaks of tension, such as the death of Mr. William after Freddy wishes for his death. And this is the moment in which the reader suspects that the monkey's ball still has power on it to grant wishes, even though it has already had the three owners that Sergeant Morris mentioned. These events also increases the reader's tension because they can perceive the skepticism of Freddy, and this makes the reader longs for another event that will leave no doubt in Freddy that the monkey's paw has really granted his wish. Then we have the climax, which is the section of the story that generates more tension in the reader. When Freddy is going to the restaurant and he's stuck in a traffic jam, he cannot stop thinking about the death of Mr. Williams and if the monkey's paw has something to do with his death. So he decides to give it another try by wishing that a biker that is passing next to him has an accident. And to his great delight, his wish is granted, and before his eyes, he witnesses that the monkey's paw is really a powerful talisman that can grant wishes. And in this scene, we can imagine how Freddy opens his eyes with excitement, looking at the monkey's paw, which is like when we suddenly make a great discovery. And basically, this is the part of most tension in this story. After that, it comes the falling action. Now that Freddy knows that the monkey's paw really works, he also came to realize that every time he makes a wish, there is a consequence that he must face. For example, when he wishes for the first time, the consequence was that he loses his job, and when he do it for the second time, his car crashed. Basically, in the following action, Freddy discovers the secrets of the monkey's paw, and beyond of that, and more importantly, he realizes how to trick the monkey's paw rules. Finally, we have the resolution of the story. Before the end of this story, when Freddy discovers the real power of the monkey's paw, we can see that there is a significant change in the personality of this character, because his most precious possession, which is the car, is not important to him anymore. We can notice this because when the other driver crashed into his car, Freddy doesn't say anything to him. Instead, he just opens the door, takes the monkey's paw, and leaves without saying a word. So we can see that Freddy, blinded by greed, found out that he can get all what he wants with a monkey's paw. This change in the main character's personality leads the story to its resolution because the character goes to a nearby forest, takes the monkey's paw with both hands, and makes his last wish. However, as you may have noticed, the story has an open ending because at the end of the story the reader doesn't know what Freddy wished for. Nevertheless, there are some clues in the text that may give the reader an idea of what could have been Freddy's last wish. First, we know that Freddy came up with an idea of how to trick the monkey's paw rules, and also Freddy is convinced that he will have much more than only one wish. He imagines all the fortune and power that this object will grant him. Now, as you may remember, the monkey's paw has two rules. First, it only grants 3 wishes, and second, every wish has a negative consequence for the owner. However, there is not a third rule that says that you cannot change the rules. And probably that is what Freddy understood after he made his second wish. However, we can see that Freddy is not 100% sure if his third wish will work, because before wishing he says, "This better works." And after that, the ending of the story is up to the reader's imagination. Maybe it didn't work, or maybe it worked and he will get all what he wanted. We'll never know. So To conclude, we wrote a possible continuation for the story of the monkey's paw and we analyzed it in terms of character and plot. Specifically, my partner Mariana talked more in detail about Freddy, which is the most important and complex character of this story. We also made an analysis of the plot and how its different parts were developed throughout the narrative. So, I hope you enjoyed the story. Thanks for listening and have a nice day.